Thanks guys for coming. Let me shut off this little parking ticket animation thing I made this morning with some of the data that's on the Socrata site. But let me just, I'm going to do a little introduction, and then we got John here who's going to sort of talk us through things. I'm not going to set it into play mode here, but thanks for coming. You know, we are ESRI. We work very closely with the city in terms of giving them tools for spatial data, for visualization analysis, data management, right? So a lot of, they do a lot with our software. You saw this morning, Yasha showed a couple screenshots. They had maps in them. Mayor's dashboard had a map. The snow cop thing, how they manage their streets and all that. The Waze data was looking at real-time traffic and stuff like that. All, you know, using some of the ESRI technology. And I don't know if you know us, but we're not a small company. We're actually a pretty big company. We're a billion-dollar company. We've been around for 45-ish years, right? And we do GIS, and we help with all those things I just mentioned: spatial data management, analysis, visualization, etc. Okay, so we're happy to be here. We're happy to give you access to some of those tools. And if you're not familiar with the GIS stuff, it does all kinds of cool things, not just managing spatial data, but it also it's used by companies like FedEx. They use it to optimize the routing of their trucks. It's used by utilities to know how to isolate a valve for a pipe burst or something like that. It's used by crime analysts to look at where pockets of crime are and look at trends and things like that. And of course, it's used here in the city, as I mentioned, for snow operations and all kinds of stuff across the city. So I wanted just very briefly to show you a couple resources, and then I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to show you some more detailed developer and other resources. I'm Tom, John's here, and also Lori. We're all here from Redlands. We're also, or not Redlands, we're from around, but from ESRI, and we're all at the table over in the main hall there. So come talk to us. Let us help you if you want. I put a couple resources on this slide. They're also on the board. We're going to look at one of them in a minute. This is the first one's probably the easiest to remember. Tiny URL ESRI Hub Hacks. Okay, and that's we'll look at that in a minute. There you can find information for developers and also for non-developers. You can sign up for a free developer account, which John will talk more about. And there's also a coupon code or a voucher code that'll get you a whole bunch of credits that you can do analysis and do the things that you want to do with the data. So I also mentioned that if you have questions after today, you can post them on the challenge post discussion forum, and we'll pick them up there. I put my email address on there, but it's so long you might just come grab my card if you want and come talk to me. But let's have a look at this ESRI Hub Hacks site. Okay, so this is just a place where we've gathered some resources for you if you want to do spatial stuff. So you'll see information about tools for developers. Again, John in just a few minutes is going to talk more about that, okay, and in great detail. Different APIs and SDKs and things like that. We have a whole set of services that are cloud-based that if you sign up for a developer account, you get access to. That's hosting data, that's making maps, that's doing analysis and visualization without even needing to be a developer. In fact, that parking map that I had up, if you saw it, I did in about 3 minutes using the data from Socrata, putting it on the web, in the cloud, and animating it over time. So very quick to do. You don't have to use it, but it's there if you want to host or build maps and things like that without developers. We also have a whole suite of desktop products, so you can download desktop products if you're really into it, get into it that way. And the last thing I just wanted to show you was this Boston Maps Open Data site. This is that complement site that Kurt talked about to the Socrata site. So this has a lot of the spatial data. We've taken some, not all of the layers, but we started taking some of the data that Kurt has made available in Socrata. Anything that had a spatial component to it, try to get it on here so it's easy to find. And the reason we did this was because if you look at these things, if you pick one, and we'll just look at one real quick, and then I'll pass it over to John. If we pick, say, this parking tickets layer, not only can you look at it and query it and filter it, but you can download it. So I don't know if you see this thing on the right here. You can download it as KML, as shapefile. You can get a GeoJSON endpoint for it if you want to just suck it in that way. An ArcGIS REST endpoint. in an ESRI format, and also spreadsheets and things like that. So lots of ways through that open data portal. There's some of the data that, again, is spatial. We're trying to get that in there to make it really easy for you to consume in whatever you want to consume it in, whether you do it via GeoJSON shapefile, ESRI REST, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to point that out, that as a complement to the Socrata website, we're putting some of those Socrata data sets in here for you to try to give you quick and easy access to it. And then there's a whole bunch of other supporting spatial layers in there. I think Kurt mentioned zoning subdistricts, and you'll find address points and all kinds of other interesting spatial data that you might want to play with. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand it over to John. He's going to talk to you about some of the cool stuff you can do with our tools.
Hook up my laptop real quick. So how many of you guys are like pretty good hardcore developers, but the geography and the maps and stuff is new to you? Not a lot of hands. How many of you are like into maps and consider yourself kind of more just getting started with programming, but you're interested and you want to kind of do more of it? Okay, what would the other option be? You're not interested in any of it? No maps? I mean, it's kind of getting harder and harder to make a cool application that doesn't involve space and in some context now, so it's kind of, that's kind of a good thing. First, I'll just kind of just one time, let me not extend my displays. Give me 2 seconds. Display, scaled, arrangement, mirrored, and then I can, all right, appreciate it. So this is that website we were talking about, developers.arcgis.com. So the kind of too long didn't read for this whole presentation is anybody in the world can create a free account, and it's not a trial, it's like a perpetual developer's license. It gives you access to all of our APIs and SDKs. If you're working with, you want to spin up your own hosted services with your data, you can do that. If you want to just kind of go to authoritative data and mash up services that are already there, you can do that too. There's a whole sort of plethora of different spatial sort of analysis services that you can connect to. If you're interested in like elevation data, turning addresses into locations, doing routing, complex routing. If you want to take a location and say, from here, how far could I drive along the roads in 10 minutes? How far could I get? And return me a polygon that expresses that area as opposed to routing from point A to point B. It's up to you what stuff you're interested in. So you got to kind of get in there and dig around and disregard the stuff that's not kind of relevant to you, and then dig into the doc for what seems interesting. But you create that free account. The other real important thing is that gives you 50 credits a month, and that's enough for prototyping. You know, that's something that you can use. But if you apply that voucher, so here once I've signed in, you'll see this redeem voucher, and you plug in hub hacks, all uppercase 15, that just gives you 1,000 credits, which is a ton, to do more analysis and kind of just charge up your account. So we want all you guys to do that. It's here for you this week. It's not going to expire on you next week. If you want to mess around with it later, that's cool too. So I'll kind of follow the same track we were talking about before. Instead of dealing with parking tickets, I was kind of interested in the liquor licenses data. So when I was doing this search, when I saw liquor, I was like, okay, the liquor licenses are cool, and we displaying all this stuff. I wanted to go in and kind of get a look at the attributes, what was, besides the points where these liquor licenses got assigned. I was looking through the attributes here, and I saw there was like a subcategory for filtering by like the type of license, and there was one that was, what was it called? It had something that I thought was really funny. It was like, license description, like all kinds of alcohol or just beer. There was one subcategory for like malt liquor, like where they're allowed to have malt liquor, and I was like, that's kind of a wild one. So let's just filter those out. And you can do that filtering here, and you can download that data set. When what Todd showed you before is you got a download to kind of extract this, but you can also work with the live service, keep working with the live service. So if you want to download, that's fine. But when you do this filtered data set, download entire data set, or API, if you click the filtered API, this GeoService and GeoJSON. GeoJSON is something you use in Leaflet. GeoService is kind of more ubiquitous in our terms. If I click this API link, this is just an HTML rendering of these liquor licenses, there's a spatial service behind the scenes. They've loaded it in a database, and we can query on that with an API and return JSON or return HTML. And you can see by default, we're filtering like a bounding box. We only care about the liquor licenses in one place. And I don't think I bothered setting that query, but if you set a filter or a clause on liquor license type equals X, you'll get the features returned to you, and it'll tell you all their attributes. So I don't know if this seems boring or interesting, but the cool thing about this is whether you're working with the authoritative data or whether you spin up your own service, you don't have to handle like managing the Amazon instance to get this in the public cloud. You don't have to install a database and load the data and then write some server-side code that's going to make sure that you can query out that data spatially. You kind of get that all rolled right in. So if we go back to developers.arcgis.com, in the dashboard here from the homepage, I was telling you about a bunch of analysis services you could kind of work with. One of those subcategories is just hosted data. And this is to say, I want to upload a shapefile, or I want to upload a CSV, and I know the latitude and longitude of these points, or maybe I just have a table and I've got addresses. Turn that into a spatial service for me, spin that up for me, and then afterwards I'll use it in my app. So that's just kind of a way to turbocharge your development so you're not spending a lot of time administering, you just kind of get started and going. So that URL of this these liquor licenses, I plugged that into the GUI, and here I jumped from just going to developers.arcgis.com. That stuff we see, it's not that it's just for developers, but we want to try to isolate tools for developers so they don't get overwhelmed by everything the rest of the world uses. But arcgis.com is a site for all kinds of GIS users. And it has a UI here, we call this the map viewer. And whether you're a developer or not, you can plug in services here. And what I did was just go into this map. I'm gonna re-sign in again, because I logged out before. I signed back in, I dropped these points, and let me turn off this stuff first. My first step was just to add this layer from the web, and I can plug in that same RESTful service here. And I don't need all the query and all that. I just need the URL of the original service. I should have clipped that off before. But if I get rid of this and just go down to my feature service, I can add that layer to the map and draw those points. And that draws all the points. And I can do the same thing. I can filter in here and say, actually, I only care about the liquor licenses with the malt liquor, and display these in the map and start working with them. Points on the map, kind of interesting, but not that interesting. It's like, well, what's interesting to me kind of with respect to this malt liquor license? It's like, well, how about like what areas are close enough to walk to this, like within a quarter mile? So if I take the liquor licenses layer and I click this little pop-up on the side, I can do this perform analysis. And there's a whole bunch of categories of analysis, but what these tools do in a nutshell is say, wherever your input data came from, let's create another derived data set that adds some more value or answers a question. So in this case, I wanted to do a drive time, and not driving, I was caring about walking. So we got driving and trucking and walking, and you can go either by time or distance. And we say, along the roads or along actual walking paths, what areas are close to this and which ones aren't. And when you run this analysis, you give the output a name. This creates another hosted service for you in the back end, and it burns a couple credits. So you kind of do all this stuff at a small scale when you're just working with the free license. But when you're done, you get, I'm going to do the like cooking show thing, and it was this one. And I'm not doing it, it doesn't take like an hour to run. It just takes a minute or two. I just want to sort of speed things up. So I guess in Boston, you kind of have like pretty good access in which you can kind of walk in every direction, but in some places where it's more rural, you'll see like these spider polygons, and something maybe close to the roads, or what constitutes access isn't necessarily just a round buffer. So that kind of thing is interesting. The next step I thought was interesting was like, well, who do we care about, like with respect, in particular, what people do we want to see their access to this malt liquor? And I was like, well, what about like census data, like how many people and what, people in particular. So another analysis you can run here, I'm going to do the same cook and show thing in a minute, is this, we call this data enrichment. You could say enrich my layer. So I have points and I got a bunch of open data from the city, there's a bunch of attributes already there, but I want to create some new attributes that weren't there before. And when I select some variables here in this GUI, you can say, well, we think you might be interested in like age or income. And I was like, yeah, income's interesting. And then within income, we want to look at like 2014 medium income. There's food stamps and SNAPs, like household. Breaking up the income, we can say, well, what about incomes like less than $34,000? You can get really fine-grained in the variables that come from an American Community Survey. So I ran this analysis, and this one didn't take long either, but we're still skipping it in the sake of time. And the output of that was below poverty. So I did this below poverty quarter-mile walk distance. So these are still just points, but I went to another step, and I wanted to symbolize this appropriately. So I said configure style, and the default option here for like counts and amounts, I chose from the options. I wanted to, I'm getting lost here because I think I already set this option. The gist of it was it created a new attribute field that said, we're going to slice and dice the census data and get a raw value for the root number of people that are within this quarter-mile walking distance. And then I want to use that value as a way to symbolize. So these big dots are areas where there's upwards of 2,000 people within a quarter mile of the malt liquor license. And these areas are where, either it's more affluent or there are less people. I did all this in the airport on like 2 hours of sleep this morning. I was like trying to come up with a sort of somewhat interesting way to sort of get us past points on the map into the realm of answering interesting questions. And you can do that by mashing up different open data layers that you find coming from the city. There's lots of good correlations and things that you can do, with multiple data sets that come from there. But one of the cool sort of powers of ArcGIS Online is it lets you tap into this generic census data. And if you wanted to get a hold of all this census data for the US, it would be gigs and gigs and gigs, and you'd have to pay somebody money because they only do the census every 10 years, and then somebody has to kind of extrapolate that out into the future, and it's a big deal. We're in the sort of business of creating access to this stuff as a cloud service, and in a production environment, when you kind of go big scale, it costs us a lot of money to run the Amazon servers and back this all up. But for developers and for civic hackers like you, we want to just give you access to these tools because it's really interesting stuff. And if you can build something that's useful to the city or useful to the public, the licensing and the payment, it'll all work itself out in the future. It's something that we want to sort of innovate by giving access, and that's really cool. So cool, I'm doing a bunch of analysis and I got some layers here. That's great. I could share this URL with somebody, but they're like, what is this map viewer? How do we kind of get the final product here shareable? And if you're a JavaScript developer, we got APIs. You can write all the code you want from scratch. But something else that we have that's cool is when you want to share the output of your work, you can define if you want to share it with everybody or keep it private. But when you make something public, you can make a web application. We got a bunch of templates here so that you can say, make me a JavaScript app to share this. So I did this one too. Should quit doing the cooking show stuff. But this is a JavaScript app that adds a nice legend. I used a different base map. I gave it a title so people could actually work with it. You have a question? You're still? So this was like click, click, click through the wizard, choose blue, and you're rolling. That's cool. This is also still downloading, open source code in GitHub. So if you wanted to download this JavaScript app and add something new to it or take something away, it's got a configurable interface, but it's also extensible, to developers. So it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's kind of a big deal in terms of just like quick wins. The other thing I added in here was like, you could configure in the dialog here, it's like, we can search on, I don't know if my internet's that good, let me see. Hell. Yeah, so here we've got search on the individual liquor licenses. So if you want to sort of add not just panning and zooming, but searching on the layers. And that's kind of interesting, I think, to, let me show you that configuration dialog. So if I go back, so you can see what I'm talking about. If I go to content, and I made a folder for hub hacks and my web mapping application. These are all kind of items in a portal that you can mess with. I can configure this app. So this is where I decided to make like that panel blue instead of orange. I set that title, to be something a little bit more descriptive. I could add a custom logo. And then here we go. This location search, I wanted to search on liquor licenses, and then I chose business name. So I dug into that data and set the field that I wanted to configure search on, and the JavaScript's all doing this for me behind the scenes. So there's some big wins there for developers and non-developers alike. That is, what is that, like, how much time we got? We got like 20 more minutes. So those are like some configurable template things for the developers out there and the non-developers. Like, I mean, for me, like working at ESRI was a good excuse for me to get started in GitHub. I had no clue what GitHub was, and only through just kind of like hacking at it and playing around and like downloading code and doing a lot of Googling was I able to like figure out how to get a hold of all this open source code. But we've got just literally tons and tons and tons of projects in GitHub there. Templates for JavaScript applications. We've got, any of you guys use Leaflet or know about Leaflet? So Leaflet's an open source JavaScript API. So we have our JavaScript API, there's Google Maps API. Leaflet's another really popular one. If you like Leaflet and you want to work with it, we wrote extensions or plugins for Leaflet, so you can take URLs like this one and say, draw that in a leaflet map, and make it so that I don't have to write code for every request. So I'll give you a good example here. Back here, so feature layers in, this is gonna be kind of simple, but whatever. This is points on the map in ESRI Leaflet. We make a leaflet map, we add the base map layer, we add our feature layer, and what happens here as we pan and zoom around the map, you draw these points, we fire off these queries to the service behind the scenes in a grid, bounding box by bounding box. So if you had a service that had 100,000 points in it or something, you don't have to handle in your logic or your JavaScript application like, well, it's too much data to view at this point. It's going to dynamically fetch the features that are relevant, return those as JSON, and then parse that in GeoJSON. You can style that. You can kind of do whatever you want with it. There's a bunch of leaflet samples here. I actually work on that API, so I'm a good person to help you with it if you want to mess around with it today or even afterwards. The JavaScript, our other JavaScript API that this template's built on is a little bit more robust. It kind of has more functionality for all of the various service types that you can use our tools to publish. So there's more templates and pre-configured stuff with that API, but what we say, different strokes for different folks. And then another cool sample I want to show you. This is a leaflet sample where we just do freehand drawing, and then we use D3 to plot the elevation. So we just draw this 2D line on the map and take lat longs. And what we're using is an ESRI service in the background. We pass that 2D geometry to the elevation service. It enriches it to make it 3D. And then we don't really draw it 3D on the map. We take the values, those Z values that came back to draw that elevation profile. So that uses Leaflet plus our plugin for Leaflet plus this D3 control. So you're kind of mashing up a bunch of plugins, which is, developers love to mash up stuff and not write stuff from scratch. And another thing we've got for charting, because I know, how many of you guys are interested in D3? Yeah, a lot. I mean, D3 is cool. This is kind of a library that we have in GitHub as well. It's called Cedar, and it's a way to try to sort of get some interaction between feature services and charts. So in this case, you can see we've got this sort of dynamic link between the points in DC. I don't have no idea what this data represents. The zip codes, it's probably like people that live within the zip code, I'm guessing. And these individual points, probably census blocks and then totals from the census blocks. But there's some really cool examples here of dealing with the map and dealing with the D3. So those are just some cool examples. But then going back to the developer site, just like World Tour, we talked about elevation a fair amount. The service I mentioned before was spatial analysis. I think it's in there. No, let me go back one step. The elevation, I think we got to go to documentation, featured layers, where was it? So there's so much stuff in here, I got lost. Here it is, elevation analysis. So that profile and summarizing elevation, we've got services, so like draw on viewshed, so you could pass a point to the service and then it'll return a polygon to you of what you can see based on the topography. If you can see, you can't see uphill. The same thing like tracing, like downstream. So if you wanted to do an app that was kind of like, what do you call it, like the impact of, not pollution, but like water, for a watershed, if somebody's like dropping trash in the ground or plastic into the catchment area, an effect on, where it's going to go into the ocean. You could do some crazy stuff. So there's a whole, in the category of elevation services, there's a whole bunch of individual REST services that you can hit. And the general sort of rule is some of these services are free and anonymous. You make a request to the API and you get JSON back. Some of them require OAuth authentication, which is kind of a standard. But what you get sort of with the developer license is, if you go in here and create applications, you can just kind of create a dummy application to create a client ID and secret. That's a username and password for the app. And then it generates just a token that'll last for the day. So in a bigger scale production, you might have a sort of actual OAuth authentication workflow where an end user signs in or something, you're hiding the credentials, in some server-side code. But for purposes of like a hackathon, you could just stuff this token into the request. It's not going to be dangerous because it's going to expire, but you just use that for demonstration purposes to hit those services. Elevation services is just one. There's tons. So geocoding is a big one, right? Turning addresses into lat-long locations, turning points of interest. I want to search for Starbucks or sushi or even categories like amusement parks. Like there's a whole doc here for how you can search locations that include rooftop addresses, points of interest, business names, categories, and turn them into addresses. So there's a few different operations in there. If we look at the doc, we have a find where I've got a string and I want you to parse that and give me the address back. We've got suggest where like you want to do autocomplete. Somebody starts typing and you want to get suggestions based on an incomplete string. Reverse geocoding where you pass a location and you say, well, tell me what the address where that person is. The cool thing about these services is in the context of an app, if you want to do geocoding for somebody in the session of your JavaScript app, they plug in their address and then you zoom to it. That is totally free. You make an anonymous request that comes from a random IP. You don't have to worry about OAuth or anything. There's no daily limits like Google has, so it's a really sort of versatile service. If you want to take a table of data in a spreadsheet and enrich that so you have the location and you want to store it in a database, we charge like a little transactional cost, but you can geocode thousands and thousands of addresses with the free credits. And some people, I go to some hackathons where people are like, I want to write curl requests or raw HTTP requests and hit your service and parse the response all by myself, which I think is kind of gnarly. It's totally valid. There's samples here for just what their request looks like. But if you wanted to use, say for example, I'll show you another Leaflet one just because Leaflet's cool. But here's a good example of a geocoding control where I type in, what's this place called?
District Hall.
District Hall. This is new. This is gonna be a, we don't have District Hall in Boston. What was the museum next door? Institute for what?
Contemporary.
So I think we got that one. Is that the right place? Yeah, that's it. Yeah, 1 out of 2 ain't bad. This is actually a really good geocoder. So what happens here behind the scenes is you see we make some suggest requests while I'm typing like slowly. And in the response here, oh, this is probably totally unintelligible, right? Let me blow this up. So here you see the request is to geocode.arcgis.com. The text, I didn't get to Boston yet. And then the JSON that comes back. And then we get closer. When I got done, we did a find request. So I think I had the whole string by that point. So we had text and then a magic key because I selected the suggestion response that came back. And the response here tells me in lat long the latitude and longitude. And we zoom to that location. But the code here is as simple as, this is the whole code for the whole app that had that search and autocomplete. So we make a leaflet map, We add a tile layer and just use OpenStreetMap. We make this search control. So this is a plugin for helping work with our World Geocoding service. And we make an empty layer group for the results, and then we hook up an event listener to listen for when there are results. Once they come back, the data is the object that gets passed us in the callback. We clear whatever was there before, and then we've got a for loop here to loop through the individual results in that array, and we dig out their lat long, and that's how we add that map to the layer. So then we zoom into it, so then we get a graphic. So another cool thing about that search control is it works with the World Geocoding service like by default. It just expects, you didn't put anything else, we got to search on that. But you can pass in a reference to your own services that you publish with our tools and say, I want to search on my data. So if in that example, say, search and feature layers, same kind of difference, right? Same base map. Want to search on like Alaska. Or wait, what are we doing? Search and max this. Okay, let me see what we got. Oh, GIS day. I don't know what would be. GIS is cool. Okay, so here, we still get results from the World Geocoding service, but we also get results from our feature service, and they're kind of like organized for us, and people consume the results of both. So I always just thought that this was a big deal, like this idea of making search intuitive to people and wiring everything up so they're like, I don't go to one search bar for one thing and another search bar for another one. So in this case, same map, same tile layer, same search control, but in this case we pass a provider in the constructor and we just tell it about our service, like what the URL of our service is, what fields in our service we want to search on, and then what to do with the response. So you have to write a little bit more code, but then you get dynamic suggestions and concatenated results for more than one layer at the same time. That's because you're using our API. We just wanted to make this something that's helpful. So the possibilities of working with our RESTful services, you can do whatever you want. We have some tools that'll help you. It's up to you kind of as a developer to say, maybe your app, I've seen some really amazing apps that have no map whatsoever, but use the location to help people answer a question, right? So using some stuff that we've got pre-baked or rolling your own solution to say, I'm interested in where you are and I'm going to give you some information. We're going to answer some questions and you don't ever need to see a map. That can be a powerful spatial sort of solution to user experience as well. Just random sidebar. So we talked about geocoding, we talked about elevation, we've got directions. I think you guys kind of know what directions are all about. GeoTriggers is another awesome service, and this is for sending people push notifications to their phone based on them entering a certain location or exiting a certain location. So if you want to write an iOS app or an Android app, that's when people they want to do a walking tour of Boston, right? And as they navigate themselves around the city, it sends them a little push notification and says, you've hit the Museum of Institute. I don't know. I'm on no sleep right now, but those possibilities are kind of endless, and that's sort of native APIs. Those are open source for Android and iOS. Same kind of model applies. You pay credits per push, but it's like you can send thousands of push notifications even with a free developer account. So for purposes of prototyping and sharing something and building something that the city might want to use later, we're not coming here trying to like sell software. We're coming here to like help you guys sort of come up with ideas so you can give that innovation back to the city and the public, because they've already bought our software. They're already like have this stuff, and it's just a matter of having somebody help them deploy it and make it sing, for lack of a better word. So that's kind of a cool new powerful thing of you can write it. You don't have to worry about the licensing or paying or anything. You just sort of make something cool, hand it over to them, and then they've got, they pick up the license and run with it. Next one, GeoTriggers was cool. Oh, my little demo for that I should have had going while I was saying that. It's like ding. I'm not an iOS or Android guy, but I was at a hackathon a couple weekends ago, and I was supposed to be working, or I was supposed to not be hacking. I was supposed to be helping people, but I just went to GitHub, downloaded the sample that they have for Android, got Android Studio going, compiled it, and went through the steps here to like register the app, and you have to kind of register with Google and do all these pieces before it works. And I wrote an app so that when I got home, it just was like, John's Wi-Fi password is something stupid. And I was like, I know my password, but I was like, if I can get my friends to install this app before they get to my house, it's a huge, if any want to make money on that idea, it's $1 million idea, obviously. It was the best idea I could come up with. There's way better civic sort of opportunity there than what I'm doing. So then spatial analysis. Well, let's shelf it. Do you guys have any questions that you want to talk about in front of everybody about this idea? The kind of main points are you need the free developer account, you need the free credits because free credits are cool. Developers.arcgis.com is where you go to download all the SDKs, to browse the doc for the RESTful services, and see the doc for some of the client APIs that help you. The ESRI leaflet stuff that I showed you is here, our JavaScript API is here. Then you jump across, well, if you want to publish your own services, you do it through this wizard where you'll say, I want to create a new feature service, I want a new RESTful URL, and I don't have any data yet. So here's the schema, it's going to be this kind of geometry and these attributes. You can spin up a service here through a UI. If you have data, CSV or shapefile, and you want to turn that into a feature service, you have to kind of cross worlds, and you go from developers.arcgis.com to just arcgis.com, because this is something that non-developers do. The free developer account you made is the same credentials you used to sign in here. Then you're in this UI for everybody, and you can go in and add items and spin up services with existing data. This is also where your map is, so you can add layers, mash up layers from Open Data Site using the URLs that they gave you. You do the analysis in here and save the results if you want to publish from a template. ArcGIS.com is kind of the one-stop cloud portal, insert buzzword here, place that you go for a lot of the other stuff. And it's, we got a lot of websites and we got a lot of docs, so don't feel bad or don't be hard on yourself if you can't do something that you think is simple, because like we've got so much doc on so many random different things that it's kind of confusing before you land where you're supposed to be. That's why we're here. And we also want to get feedback about what seemed like it was harder than it should have been or all that. And I'm hanging out, we're all hanging out, I think, until 5. And if you want to chat more, we can chat more. If you want a card and you want to email me, holler at me on Twitter in the next couple of weeks or anytime, getting help or talking about what you're working on, we are stoked to do that. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Totally absorbed. It's like, no biggie. All right, cool. Oh, thank you.